Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 129. The book that we're going to be covering today comes out of a very specific place. But before we get into that, I'd like to bring up a point here. There is a comedy award that's given out every year at the Kennedy Center in New York City since 1998. This award is designed to honor, quote, a controversial social commentator and his, quote, uncompromising perspective of social injustice and personal folly. The mission of the prize that's given out at the Kennedy Center in New York City is to, quote, honor the greatest contributors to American comedy of our time, close quote, which matches the type of literary comedy on offer from our author today. Now, leadership and comedy aren't often thought to overlap, but on this podcast, we've already discussed in previous episodes, particularly those focused around totalitarianism, discussed the necessity of having the court jester on your team as a leader and the importance of risk-taking evident in thinking about the world through the lens of comedy. I think often of how the comedian and game show host Steve Harvey once quipped that, quote, every time a disaster happens in the world, every comedian you know already has a joke crafted about it 5 minutes after the event happens. But we can't tell that joke 5 minutes after that tragedy happens. From Shakespeare all the way to the author of our book today, in the West, the incisive value of adopting a comedic approach to the tragedies of life is of great value to the leaders of the world and to the leaders of their teams. Taking your position seriously might be great wisdom, but taking circumstances, other people, or even yourself unseriously might not be the worst thing in the world. And by the way, being humorous and seeing humor in serious situations makes a leader more authentic, not less. And we're going to talk about the crisis of authenticity that we have today, which walks parallel with the crisis of incompetence, which we've also talked extensively about on this podcast. And we're going to do that today in light of the book we will be reading today. And I'm going to, of course, as I usually do, hold up my copy here that I've got. We're going to be pulling leadership lessons from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And we're going to be joined on our journey through The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn with my co-host today, my co-guest host today, who has been on the show before. You've heard his voice before, talking about the Old Testament, talking about leadership, talking about putting Caesar back in the box, and a variety of different other topics. Brian Bagley. How you doing today, Brian?
Man, I'm doing great. Hey, son, thanks for having me.
So the challenge of Huckleberry Finn, well, there's several challenges to Huckleberry Finn. And this is a book that, well, it presents several challenges. And we're going to jump right into them. And we're going to start right in chapter 1, Discover Moses and the Bulrushers. And I quote, "You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth mainly. There was things which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That is nothing. I've never seen anybody but lied one time or another. Without it, it was Aunt Polly or the widow or maybe Mary. on Polly. Tom's on Polly, she is, and Mary and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book with some stretchers, as I said before. Now, the way to look at that book winds up is this. Tom and me found the money that the robbers hid in the cave, and it made us rich. We got $6,000 apiece, all gold. It was an awful sight of money when it was piled up. Well, Judge Thatcher, he took it and put it out at interest, and it fetched us $1 a day apiece all year round, more than a body could tell what to do with. The widow Douglas, she took me in for her son and allowed she would civilize me. But it was rough living in the house all the time, considering how dismal, regular, and decent the widow was in all her ways. So when I couldn't stand it no longer, I lit out. I got into my old rags and my sugar hogshead again and was free and satisfied. But Tom Sawyer, he hunted me up and said he was going to start a band of robbers and I might join if I would go back to the widow and be respectable. So I went back. The widow, she cried over me and called me poor lost lamb and called me a lot of other names too, but she never meant no harm by it. She put me in them new clothes again, and I couldn't do nothing but sweat, and feel all cramped up. Well, then the old thing commenced again. The widow rung a bell for supper, and you had to come on time. When you got to the table, you couldn't go right to eating. You had to wait for the widow to tuck down her head and grumble a little over the victuals, though there weren't really anything the matter with them. That is, nothing, only everything was cooked by itself. In a barrel of odds and ends is different. Things get mixed up, and the juice kind of swaps around, and things go better. After supper, she got out her book and learned me about Mosers and the bulrushes, and I was a sweat to find out all about him. But by and by, she left it out that Moses had been dead a considerable long time, so then I didn't care no more about him because I don't take no stock in dead people. Pretty soon, I wanted to smoke and asked the widow to let me, but she wouldn't. She said it was a mean practice and wasn't clean, and I must try to not do it anymore. That is just the way with some people. They get down on a thing when they don't know nothing about it. Here she was bothering about Moses, which is no kin to her and no use to anybody being gone, you see. Yet finding a power faulting me for doing a thing that has some good in it. And she took snuff, too. Of course, that was all right because, she did it herself. Her sister, Ms. Watson, a tolerably slim old maid with goggles on, had just come to live with her and took a set at me now with a spelling book. She worked me middling hard for about an hour, and then the widow made her ease up. I couldn't stand it much longer. Then for an hour, it was deadly dull, and I was fidgety. Miss Watson would say, "Don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry, and don't scrunch up like that, Huckleberry. Sit up straight." And pretty soon she would say, "Don't gap and stretch like that, Huckleberry. Why don't you try to behave?" And she told me all about the bad place, and I said I wished I was there. She got mad then, but I didn't mean no harm. All I wanted was to go somewhere. All I wanted was a change. I wasn't particular. She said it was a wicked thing to say what I said it. And she said she wouldn't say it for the whole world. She was going to live so as to go to the good place. Well, I couldn't see no advantage of going where she was going. So I made up my mind I wouldn't try for it. But I never said so because it would only make trouble. It wouldn't do no good. So begins the opening of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Now, we've covered a couple of books. We've covered at least one book by Mark Twain on this podcast before. We've talked about Roughing It, his memoir about going down the Mississippi as a young man on the paddle boats and on the river boats that went up and down the Mississippi during the pre-Civil War era of the United States. And Mark Twain, of course, is the pen name for Samuel Langhorne Clemens. Now, we covered a lot of his background on that other podcast, but just to refresh you, he was born November 30th, 1835 in Florida, Missouri. And his life story and background is probably the most well-known of any man of letters born and active during the entirety of the 19th century. And he was up against some pretty strong competition. Everybody from Edgar Allan Poe all the way to Nathaniel Hawthorne, Charles Dickens, and even Rudyard Kipling. Clemens was a writer, humorist, essayist, entrepreneur, publisher, and lecturer. William Faulkner called him, quote unquote, the father of all American literature. Clemens, like the aforementioned Edgar Allan Poe, is a person whose avatar has transcended American literature, and he has appeared, and I'm sure he would find it absolutely strange that this has happened, but he has appeared in television shows like Star Trek, and has been portrayed in live events by actors like Val Kilmer in Branson, Missouri. I think that one would really throw him for a loop, actually. Curiously enough, Samuel Langhorne Clemens was born shortly after an appearance of Halley's Comet, and he even predicted that his own death in 1910 would accompany it coming back. And he did indeed die a day after the comet was at its closest to Earth. There's a lot that can be said about Samuel Langhorne Clemens, a lot that can be said about Mark Twain, and I could say a lot about it on this podcast today, but that's why we have Brian here. He's going to say some things. So I'm going to kick it over to him and start off with this question. Brian Bagley, in looking at the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and looking at it from the perspective of 2024, well over 100 and probably almost 50 years now since its publication. Why have we lost the ability to be funny?
Wow. Well, I think there are people who can be funny. They just can't be funny in approved channels, so to speak. And so there's definitely those that know how to be funny. It's just where can you be funny and what can you be funny about? And I think we're going to get into some of the taboo things here in a little bit, so I won't get into that so much now. But I think one of the big challenges that kind of faces leaders is I think maybe I read this somewhere. You may have mentioned it, Hassan. Is so much of when we talk about authenticity. Authenticity is sort of a life that is up against a well-crafted image. Okay, and so whether it's politics or religion, kind of the old guard really wanted to present. It was very important to present a well-crafted image. And so, you think about, some of the great political scandals or religious scandals of the 1980s, sort of that unraveling period of the last century, where you had the famous, the Baker family, the religious family that had that big television empire. And of course,
Yep.
His public scandals and Tammy Faye Baker and all that. But then you also had there was a Democratic candidate for president from Colorado. He was a senator from Colorado. I believe it was 80 or 84. I cannot remember the guy's name off the top of my head. It'll come to me here in a minute. But he was a very prominent senator. Was definitely on his way to getting the nomination for the Democratic Presidential Committee. And then it came out some photos of him on a yacht with a very young woman, probably could have been his daughter. I mean, in terms of how old she was. And his presidential bid was over. Oh, it was overnight, and it was over. Same thing with John Edwards in 2008. He was challenging Barack Obama. Scandal came out, and boom. So you had this well-crafted image, and the media was the same way. The media, you had 3 channels, ABC, NBC, CBS. They were crafting and curating certain forms of news. Johnny Carson curated a certain form of comedy. Somewhere along the way, all of that curation became canned, inauthentic, because people just knew that's just not real. That's not right. It's not genuine. And so, yeah, you had other forms of comedy, news, politics. Some very unconventional things have sort of percolated in its wake. I think that kind of gets to the point you're making.
Yeah. Well, and the guy you're talking about, the senator, was Gary Hart.
Gary Hart, thank you. That's right.
Yes. Who, interestingly enough, is still alive. He's 87 years old. So There you go. Yeah. So Gary Hart, John Edwards, you mentioned Tammy Faye Baker. And, in Huckleberry Finn, Ms. Watson and the entire culture that's not on the river stands in. I think the theologian Doug Wilson would make this point, stands in for all of that, all of the ways in which Huck Finn is bound down, right? And I'm not going to get too philosophical about this because it is humorous, but it's all the, you can even see it in the first part there that I just read, which is in the first chapter, right? You know, Twain effectively skewers religion, societal pieties, the good people who are, and of course, women who are responsible for holding down boisterous, adventurous young men
Right.
and civilizing them. I mean, that's literally what, you know, right. She's going to civilize me, right? Ms. Watson's going to civilize me. And Huck doesn't want to be civilized, and humor doesn't want to be civilized. It it's like that line in Jurassic Park, right? It breaks through. It creates new forms. It has to go outside its own boundaries, right?
That's right. That's right.
I have to be able to make a joke about Gary Hart being on a boat with a woman that everybody's thinking of. To go back to that Steve Harvey, you know,
Uh-huh.
idea that I brought up, everybody's thinking this, but the comedian, the court jester, these are the people who actually open their mouths and say it. And this is why I'm a big fan of free speech, because without free speech, you stifle all of that. And then there's no, it's not just the stifling of humor that's a problem underneath an anti-free speech regime or cancel culture. It's not just that, but that's the canary in the coal mine to not solving a whole bunch of other problems. But there's a sub idea in here that I want you to flesh out a little bit more. And it's this idea that, and I think it's been coming for a while, and you mentioned the unraveling, right? And we talk a lot because the other book that we covered was The Fourth Turning, a book you recommended, and we talked about on this podcast. And you and I firmly believe that we are in the, well, I think we're at the end of the fourth turning. I think we're close to the end of the period of chaos, but there's always four turnings, right? So you know, there's a springtime high, there's a summer that's sort of, you know, kind of a summer of love, such as it were, to use a term from the most recent past. Then there's a fall that basically is a societal unraveling. Think of everything that happened in the United States between the 1970s and the end of the 1990s. And then you have a winter of chaos. Think about everything that's happened ever since 2001, all the way and September 11th, all the way to now. Okay, so those are your four cycles of history, and you and I both believe that we're walking out these cycles, and they sort of happen without our permission, right? Well, during a time of unraveling, when that authenticity is being questioned, what do you think happens? No, not what do you think happens. Why do leaders who are incumbents, why do they struggle so much during that time of unraveling? Why do they? Because this is something that's even a little bit, this is a little bit deeper in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, because when this book was written, or when this book was published, and was first published in 1884, right? Um, and it was published during a time after a period of chaos, right? It was 20 years after the Civil War, right? Um, Clemens finally felt like he could, you know, put this out there because there had been enough time that had passed between that chaotic period and when the book was published. And the slavery question had been solved. So he was writing to a culture where maybe you're not going to sell that many books in the South, but they lost the war. So, you know, Reconstruction's going on. We need to have something, you know, that sort of builds the people up. And the dynamic that was happening in the United States at that time was there weren't four generations. One generation had completely died on the fields of the battle of the Civil War. And so you had an older generation that had driven a younger generation basically to slaughter, and then a generation that was coming up after that who were kids when all that was going on, who would literally have no, as Huck Finn would say, no truck with anything going on in the past. So Twain is writing this in a very specific period of time. And so again, my question is, why do leaders struggle with times of unraveling? Not the chaos part. I understand why that, but why do they struggle in times of unraveling?
Well, I think that when you're in a period of unraveling, though, you don't know what direction the unraveling is going to take. And so
Right.
trying to stay ahead of that is certainly a challenge. One of the things I think we tend to be really hard on in what I encourage a lot of when I talk to leaders, especially younger guys that I've mentored through church or maybe on the job, and I just encourage them anytime that you reflect on history, it's good to approach history with a good dose of humility,
Hmm.
because you don't know how people are going to judge your actions and your social mores in 150 years. And so we don't know what we're doing today that we think is just top of the top. I mean, we're doing our best, and we're trying to be as moral as we possibly can. And in 150 years, what we think is the very best that we could be doing, uh, you know, our great great grandkids are just going to be so offended that we even thought that that might even be a good deal, a good way to think about things. And so just right off the bat, just whenever you approach history, or a period of time that wasn't part of your own, it's just important to understand that we don't know everything, and we certainly can't know what was going on in their hearts, in their souls when they were making decisions or making judgment calls. But to get to your point of why does a leader struggle, I think in a period of unraveling to be authentic, um, I think there's a desire. Every leader, there's a conservative nature in every leader, even progressive leaders. There's something that they have to be holding on to, in order to have a fixed point of reference that they're moving everybody toward, or past maybe. And so there's some level of conservativeness that every leader needs to possess in order to be um, uh, presentable, I guess is the right word, and to have gravitas. And so as a leader is navigating through a period of unraveling, um, there's this struggle to try to maintain this curated image, I think, of what things were in the past, and try to hold the ship together. Meanwhile, the ship could just be falling apart, and it's just a really tough thing to navigate through.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, one last question. And I kind of skipped this one, but I want to go back to it now. So what did you like about Huck Finn? Like, I know why I like the book, but why did you like the book? What tickled you about this book?
I love the caricatures of everything. I loved how he was not afraid to portray, like even the institution of slavery was a caricature of itself. And the way that the way that Jim was kind of handled, throughout the course of the adventure. And at one point he was running around on the boat with the other guys, buck naked, as they're, sitting on, and then, oh, well, what we got to make sure we need him to be tied up during the day, because he's part of the show, if you will, right? He's just
Right.
another character in the play, is what's going on. And so Jim, we just need you to play your part. Okay. That's sort of the vibe of this whole thing. And I loved that caricature, because so much of reality it's just perception. It's the perception of what is real, and the perception of what is right and wrong. And so I just really appreciated his Twain's approach uh, to all of those American institutions that were in the process of changing. I mean, like
Hmm.
you said, the American Civil War shattered a lot of societal paradigms, particularly in the South, but certainly in the North too. I mean, there were a lot of, politics was upended. Religion was definitely upended, particularly in the North, a lot more in the North than it was in the South. And so I feel like he did a good job of um, drawing on some funnier things, and some funnier, making it, making that change a little bit easier to swallow and deal with, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Well, and they didn't have TV, obviously.
Yeah,
Um, you
that's
know,
right.
the biggest mass media. that was available to people in the 19th century was newspapers. And most newspapers, people forget this. I mean, we think social media is bad, but most newspapers were driven by what we would call these days um, libel and
Yeah.
yellow journalism, literal libel, literal like this. I saw this person kill a woman in the street, and like, you know, it was a level of free speech radicalism that I don't think we. No, I won't say I don't think. I think we what we have happening on various social media platforms pales in comparison to what was going on there when all of that psychic energy was going to just one medium rather than being diffused across multiple medias and multiple media tools, right? And I do think that with the explosion of technology that we had, particularly in the later part of the 20th century, that diffusion actually has had some societal benefit. But back in the late 19th century, I mean, you had journals. Those are for the highly read academic folks. You had newspapers, and newspapers, like I said, were mostly yellow journalism. Yes, there was some reporting, but still, it was a lot of free for all there. And then the last medium that you had that was the entertainment medium, other than plays and theater, was books. I mean, people read books out loud. Books were designed to be read, and the form of the novel, while not a new form, novels have been around, good Lord, since like the Middle Ages, at least. A proto novel began then. But the form of the novel with mass and with the beginning of industrialization really began to come into the form that we know it in the later part of the 20 we now know it in the later part of the 20th century. And artists, we've talked about this on a podcast we did talking about Edgar Allan Poe, talking about Nathaniel Hawthorne, and now with Mark Twain. Those writers in the 19th century got after each other like nobody's business. They had zero problem. Notorious episode. We talked about this on the Fall of the House of the Usher episode. Edgar Allan Poe wrote critiques of other artists and other writers' writings that caused some of those writers to want to shoot him in a duel. Because this was how people solved problems back then. If you ran your mouth, you're gonna get clapped. And
It
if you
was
ran your
very
mouth,
much verbal. It was very much verbal dueling. Very much.
well, if you ran your mouth in print, like there was no like, oh, it's just some anonymous troll on Twitter.
Yes.
It was, oh, no, 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 that's Bob across the street. Oh, I'm gonna go fix that problem. Bob and by the way, everybody knew what the rules were. Like everybody knew what the rules were. Everybody knew what the consequences were. Everybody sort of participated. And as of course, as you move further west out of the east, it became even more a space of, even after the Civil War, you would think after all that bloodletting, people would stop shooting each other. No, 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 no. There's still matters of pride and matters of name. Um, and if you're going to caricature me, if you're going to turn me into an absurdity, you better be really clever with that to such a way that I laugh at my own absurdity and I don't want to shoot you. And I always think Mark Twain, whenever I read Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Adventures of Tom Sawyer, I always think that Mark Twain was sort of walking that line all of the time.
Yeah, he was. He really was. And I, you know, one of the things I really appreciate about Mark Twain is, it takes a lot of courage to do good comedy, I think,
Yeah.
because good comedy should cut both ways. And I think one of the big critiques in my mind of sort of this comedy right now is, if you're watching late night comedy, it's generally left wing. The right has its comedic influences. You know, anytime you have a comedian like Dave Chappelle, like Dave is all, Dave says some stuff that irritates both sides, but I find, whenever Dave is on Saturday Night Live, I mean, he'll say something. He did this spiel, I'm sure you saw it, on Donald Trump.
Oh
That
yeah.
was just beautiful. I mean, spot on. And it was really, really good comedy. So, I don't know. I think good comedy takes courage and
Mm-hmm.
can get you in a lot of trouble.
Well, Bill Burr, after the most recent United States presidential election, comes on Saturday Night Live and he does a whole, he softens it a little bit at the beginning, which is not typical for Bill. Usually he just goes right into it. He softens it a little bit because he knows his crowd. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to talk about what you all want me to say here today. And he goes right. I mean, he aims right at, talk about courage. He aims right at, and he says, well, ladies, you're down 0-2 to the Orange Man. And to the crowd's credit, New York City crowd, they laughed.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And he just makes it easier for them to deal with reality,
And then, he goes into a whole bit about pantsuits, and you all know how to get an extra drink. And, and there's a whole, and you can go YouTube this bit. And it is one of those where, to your point about courage, you have to be of a certain, and Bill Burr and Dave Chappelle are both of that certain ilk, where if you're going to come for them, you better be ready. If you're going to verbally spar with them, you better be ready to lose. Like, I watched a whole entire episode of Bill Maher's podcast, Club Random, that had Bill Burr on it, and he spent the entire time just skewering Bill Maher. He just roasted him the entire interview, and then claimed that Bill Maher couldn't handle it because, oh, you're so smart, you just can't handle it. And that really got under Maher's skin. Like, but what was he going to do? Like, it's his show. Like, is he going to walk off his own show? So he's stuck and he's squirming, and Bill Burr is loving it. And he just keeps just driving. And Bill Maher should have expected this as a fellow comedian. He should have expected it as a fellow comedian. And he didn't. He did because he's Bill Maher. Like, And Bill Burr is just like, I don't, who? And that, of course, is the whole point of, like, I will tell my kids this. If I want to dismiss someone, or if I want to be dismissive of somebody in a funny way, I will. I'll say in a very high pitched way. So, who? I don't know who you are. Who are you? What? Go away. And it's that dismissiveness that is inside of comedy. It's a dismissiveness of status. And I think that's what people really struggle with.
Well, and I think, to take another comedian who's probably not as political, but Nate Bargatze.
Oh, yeah.
But what makes Nate so funny is his self-deprecating authenticity.
Right.
Like, he's just the everyday schmo who comes home at 5 o'clock, and he gives you every detail about his boring life, and you laugh hysterically. Okay.
There you go.
Between him and his relationship with his wife, or the way he travels through an airport, and it's just, everybody's been there, and it's funny.
Everybody's been there. All right, so back to the book. We're gonna pick up a little later in Huckleberry Finn, but back to the book, back to the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. By the way, this book is open source. You can check it out online. You can get yourself a free copy. I'm reading the Bantam Classic version, but it's the same version you can find open source everywhere where you download books on the internet. All right, so we're going to go directly into chapter 10. We're going to leapfrog over a couple of different things, because if you know the story or the underpinnings of Huckleberry Finn, you don't need me to read the whole book. So Huck escapes the bounds of society, and he goes out on the river, which is the only place he can be free. By the way, when I first read this book, I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I really resonated with that idea of, going out on the river and just floating down the river on a raft. It was only as I got older that I began to resonate with other aspects of this story. But he's on the raft. The escaped slave Jim is with him, and He's going to wind up. He's going to wind up in some with a streak of bad luck here from handling from handling snakeskin. So, what comes from handling snakeskin? Chapter 10. After breakfast, I wanted to talk about the dead man and guess how he came to be killed, but Jim didn't want to. He said it would fetch bad luck, and besides, he said he might come and haunt us. And he said a man that weren't buried was more likely to go haunting around than one who was planted and comfortable. That sounded pretty reasonable, so I didn't say no more, but I couldn't keep from studying over and wishing I knowed who shot the man and what they'd done it for. We rummaged the clothes we got and found $8 in silver, sewed up in the lining of an old blanket overcoat. Jim said he reckoned the people in that house stole the coat because if they'd have known the money was there, they would have left it. I said I reckoned they killed him too, but Jim didn't want to talk about that. I says, now you think it's bad luck, but what did you say when I fetched the snakeskin that I found on top of the ridge the day before yesterday? You said it was the worst bad luck in the world to touch a snakeskin with my hands. Well, here's your bad luck. We've raked in with all this truck and $8 besides. I wish you could have some bad luck like this every day, Jim. Never you mind, honey, never you mind. Don't you get too pert. It's a coming. Mind I tell you what's coming? It did come too. It was a Tuesday that we had that talk. Well, after dinner Friday, we was laying around in the grass at the upper end of the ridge and out of tobacco. I went to the cavern to get some and found a rattlesnake in there. I killed him and curled him up in the foot of Jim's blanket, ever so natural, thinking there'd be some fun when Jim found him there. Well, by night, I forgot all about the snake, and when Jim flung himself down on the blanket while I struck a light, the snake's bait was there, and it bit him. He jumped up yelling, and the first thing the light showed was a varmint curled up and ready for another spring. I laid him out in a second with a stick, and Jim grabbed Pap's whiskey jug and began to pour it down. He was barefoot, and the snake bit him right on the heel. That all comes out of me, but such a fool is to not remember that wherever you leave a dead snake, its mate always comes there and curls round it. Jim told me to chop off the snake's head and throw it away, and then to skin the body and roast a piece of it. I'd done it, and he eat it and said it would help cure him. He made me take off the rattles and tie them around his waist, too. He said that would help. Then I slid out quiet and throw the snake clear away amongst the bushes, for I wasn't going to let Jim find out it was all my fault, not if I could help it. Jim sucked and sucked at the jug, and now and then he got out of his head and pitched around and yelled, but every time he come to himself, went on sucking at the jug again. His foot swelled up pretty big, and so did his leg. By and by, the drunk begun to come, and so I judged he was all right. But I'd rather been bit with a snake than Pap's whiskey. Jim was laid up for 4 days and nights. Then the swelling was all gone, and he was all around again. I made up my mind I wouldn't ever take a hold of snakeskin again with my hands, now that I see what had come of it. Jim said he reckoned I would believe him next time. And he said the handling of the snakeskin was such an awful bad luck that maybe we hadn't got to the end of it yet. He said he'd rather see the new moon over his left shoulder as much as 1,000 times to take up a snakeskin in his hand. Well, I was getting to feel that way myself, though I've always reckoned that looking out the new moon over your left shoulder is one of the carelessest and foolishest things the body can do. Old Hank Bunker done it once and bragged about it, and in less than 2 years got himself drunk and fell off a shot tower and spread himself out so he was just kind of a layer, as you may say. And they slid him edgeways between two barn doors for a coffin and buried him, so they say, but I didn't see it. Pap told me. But anyway, it all come looking at the moon that way like a fool. Well, the days went along and the river went down between its banks again, and about the first thing we done was to bait one of them big hooks with a skinned rabbit and set it to catch catfish that was as big as a man, being 6 foot 2 inches long and weighing over 200 pounds. We couldn't handle him, of course. He would have flung us into the Illinois. We just sat there and watched him rip and tear around till he drowned. We found a brass button in his stomach and a round ball, lots of other rubbish. We split the ball open with a hatchet, and there was a spool in it. Jim said he'd had it there a long time to coat it over so and make a ball out of it. It was as big a fish he was ever catching in the Mississippi, I reckon. Jim said he couldn't even see a bigger one. He would have been worth a good deal over at the village. They peddle out such a fish that by the pound in the market house. Everybody buys some of him. His meat's as white as snow and makes a good fry. Next morning, I said it was starting to get slow and dull, and I wanted to get it stirring up some anyway. I said I reckoned I would slip over the river and find out what was going on. Jim liked the notion, but he said I must go in the dark and look sharp. Then he studied it over and said, couldn't I put on some of them old things and dress up like a girl? That was a good notion, too. So we shortened up one of those calico gowns. I turned up my trouser legs and went to my legs and got into it. Jim hitched it behind with the hooks, and it was a fair fit. I put on a sunbonnet and tied it to my chin, and then for a body to look in and see my face was like looking down the joint of a stovepipe. Yeah. Jim said nobody would know me, even in daytime. Hardly. I practiced around all day to get the hang of things, and by, I could do pretty well on it by then. Only Jim said I didn't walk like a girl, and he said I must quit pulling up my gown to get in my breeches pockets. I took notice, and I'd done better. I started up the Illinois shore in a canoe just after dark. And then from there, things get even worse. One of the challenges that people have with the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, along with the broken speech patterns, the broken English usage, the what Zora Neale Hurston would later call the vernacular of the time, the malapropisms, some of which we read in that little section there, and the quote unquote in jokes that have not stood the test of time because we're just not culturally, contextually aware of all the tiny things that were going on around this book. All of these things gather together, but they are dwarfed by the use 219 times of, and I'm going to say it here, so everybody block your ears if you're listening with your kids. Block your ears if you're in the car with your kids. I'm about to say the word. The use of the word nigger 219 times in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn has driven people in our increasingly sensitive age crazy. This really started back in the 1960s with the civil rights movement and has continued with increasing sharpness into our own era. But here's the thing. People did use that word on the regular, and people did use the word to refer to themselves and others. And yes, word usage has changed over time. I'm a big fan of linguistics and the work of the writer John McWhorter and others in the linguistic space. And yes, words do change. They do drop out of usage and they come into usage. The words change meaning over the course of time. And yes, that word, the in word, such as it were, has moved and migrated over time and has changed in meaning as society and context has shifted around. For many postmodern readers with delicate sensibilities and political leanings, this word makes people feel as though they do not want to touch the book with a 10-foot pole. As a matter of fact, African American legislators in New Jersey, a couple, presented a non-binding resolution in the state assembly a couple of years ago, proposing to remove Twain's novel from the state curriculum, declaring that, quote, the novel's use of a racial slur and its depictions of racist attitudes can cause students to feel upset, marginalized, or humiliated, and can create an uncomfortable atmosphere in the classroom, close quote. The inability of postmodern culture to contextualize the past appropriately and teach the past without emotion sets up a dichotomy where people of all races miss the essentialism of remembering the grimy parts of the past that don't fit with our conception of how the past should work for us right now. Author Ta-Nehisi Coates, a man who I share almost no opinion in common with, except for this one that I was able to find, wrote in his essay, A Nation of Cowards, that, quote, censoring Twain's work was a shocking act of disrespect toward the writer, executed by people who claim to hold up his legacy. Because we can't handle the story of who we were and evidently who we are, Twain must be summoned up from the dead and, all against himself, submitted before the edicts of amateurs. This is our system of fast food education laid bare. Let us all live in a world of warm snugglies. Let the air-conditioned anesthesia sprawl free. May the flowers of happiness multiply out. May Mark Twain's ghost haunt us all. Close quote. I find myself agreeing with Mr. Coates. Weirdly enough, we're strange bedfellows on this one, but bedfellows nonetheless. So let's talk about the inward. Let's talk about the grimy parts of Huck Finn. Brian, you're a white guy from Texas. I'm a black guy not from Texas. one of the objections that I read to this from one of the legislatures was, or an educator from back in 2019, was that they didn't want to have to explain to their daughter why this word had to be used 219 times in this novel. So it would just be easier to not have her read it. And I just thought, what a failure of parenting, along with a failure of education. I've had my kids read this book, all of them, except for my 7-year-old, for whom it is not appropriate yet, just like most things aren't appropriate for a 7-year-old. But my 14-year-old has read it, my 19-year-old's read it, and my 27-year-old read it a long time ago. We don't make the grimy parts less grimy by just ignoring them. But Twain didn't think it was grimy. So how do we position this book for our current sensibilities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it says less about Twain and it says more about our sensibilities. As misguided as I think they are, and there is a and I kind of alluded to this earlier when I was talking about anytime you approach history, you got to approach it with some level of respect for the good and the bad. Every period of human history, and every person for that matter, is a mixed bag. Okay, like every single person without exception is a mixed bag. And just because and I would say if you were looking at Mark Twain in his context, he would definitely be a man on the progressive side of things, I think. And yet, he wasn't Antifa. Okay.
No.
He was. Now he might have. Who knows? Maybe inwardly he was a fan of the abolitionists. The hardcore John Brown or somebody. I don't know that. But he was more self-aware for sure, and he definitely had his leanings and his opinions on things. But I think when it comes to navigating our sensibilities, especially for the next generation. I mean, so you brought up these people trying to pass a law because they were trying to protect kids, quote unquote. The one thing that a parent has to do is your parents have to help their kids understand the difference between beliefs and convictions. And a belief is something you're willing to argue over. A conviction is something you're willing to die over. Mm-hmm. And so, like, kids are going to pick up beliefs and convictions. Like, that's going to happen. The question is, from who? And if you're a parent and you feel strongly about something, I don't know why you would shy away from having to explain anything to your children, especially in a world that is going to tell them all kinds of nonsense. Some good, some bad, but I certainly wouldn't leave it up to chance. So it's just, just set aside the argument of whether or not the legislation was a good or a bad thing. I think it's just profoundly short-sighted to take that approach, just to even take that approach.
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show. Well, it's the ultimate example of we live in a fallen world, but our technology has progressed on a J curve up and to the right. So human beings should change as fast as our iPhones. And because they don't, let's pass this piece of legislation.
Yeah. Right.
It's sort of the ultimate, like, let's use government power to remake society. I mean, it's the argument that the conservatives have against progressives. Why are you using government power for social engineering? And progressives can never explain that. And by the way, they don't feel they need to. Going back to Woodrow Wilson, interestingly enough, who was a child during the Civil War and was the last president born during the Civil War, and who was a scientific progressive, his words, not mine, and believed we could use science to remake the world because we were better than people in the past, because we had Darwin, so we knew more stuff.
Yeah, and I hope Darwin is on his way to the dustbin of history. I have my doubts, but I definitely have a lot of disagreements with Darwin's understanding of the application of his understanding to the anthropology of the human race. That's just not the way that a Christian can think about, the nature of man and how evil entered the world and how it will be addressed. So,
well, one of the things that I think Twain really got onto, not to interrupt you, but I think one of the things that Twain really got onto was this idea that, that the scientific materialist progressives miss, all the way from Woodrow Wilson to Richard Dawkins. Here's what they miss. And I listened to Dawkins' most recent interview with Jordan Peterson, where he got really frustrated with Dr. Peterson and his critique of the entire conversation, which I later read, was that Peterson is drunk on ideas, and ideas don't matter to Dawkins. All that matters to Dawkins is the material fact of being able to put a rocket on the moon. That's the only thing that matters to him. Everything else is kids' stories and superstition. He didn't care about any of that. He cares about the material fact. He cares about the things that lead to that material fact of being able to put a rocket on the moon. Except what Dawkins misses is the reason, the meaning behind putting that rocket on the moon is not scientific materially based. And this is what Twain got. You need to have a reason, a story that drives Huck out of civilization into the river. You have to have a story that causes Huck to have genuine torn feelings about whether to work for Jim's escape as a slave or to engage in continuing the societal process during his time of selling this guy as flesh to people, as a tool. There's a story there, and the scientific materialistic people miss the story all the time. And it's kind of amazing because, again, they have little interest, this is my critique, they seem to have little interest in understanding the nature of man. They claim very much to understand the nature of man. Marxists, progressives, Darwinists all claim to understand the nature of man better than conservatives do, and yet they seem to have very little interest in individual humans.
Yeah. We like to say at our house that the world is not just stuff. The world is also composed of non-material things, ideas, even non-material beings that we can't see, don't have access to, but very much exist and influence our world in very profound ways. And so, if you're coming, if that whole line of possibilities is off limits to you, then you're going to come to very different conclusions about the reality of the world in which we exist. So, yeah, I think for Mark Twain's part, he I think at one point he talks about the angel that the good angel and the bad angel that can get a hold of a man and
Yep.
causes cause him to pick right or wrong. He's while this book is a caricature, he's not wrong about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so that's very much part of the reality. And even when Jim is talking about some of the hairball and some of the witchcraft type things that he's been exposed to, again, that's an allusion to other forces outside of the material world that are influencing what's happening in
Yeah.
the plot of the book. So anyway,
Well, and I think leaders, like I'm sure the legislators who proposed the banning of the book in New Jersey, and saying this from my location in Texas amuses me for a whole variety of reasons. Um, but the legislators that were proposing banning Twain's book in New Jersey, in the New Jersey school system, for very self-serving reasons, seem to not understand caricature because they don't understand human nature. And I just think people who are more temperamentally oriented towards conservatism just understand human nature better. They just do. They decomplicate human nature, and they don't live in, well, I won't say they don't live. They can't live in their own ivory towers. I won't make that claim. But they decomplicate human nature. And I think, and this is sort of my last idea, maybe I'll bounce this off you. So I think, not I think, I know Mark Twain has changed over the course of time. Again, he would be shocked at how much his image maybe has changed and probably become a caricature of who he actually was. Um, and he might find that he may I think he would
very
probably
much.
find I think he would probably find that to be ironic, actually. I think the irony of that would strike him as humorous. Um, do we need a Mark Twain for our time? I'm not meaning somebody who steps in like in the Kennedy Center honors and gets a prize. That's not what I'm talking about. Kevin Hart most recently received the Kennedy Prize, the Mark Twain Prize, right? Most recently, Bill Cosby had his prize stripped from him. Richard Pryor got one, even though Bill Cosby wouldn't show up and give it to him because he said Richard Pryor cursed too much. So I mean, Jerry Seinfeld's never received one, which I find to be incredibly interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
that's
and
right.
and and very interesting.
Very funny Jewish man.
Very funny Jewish man who has not received one, even though another very funny Jewish man, um, what's his name? Did History of the World Part One. Um, oh, you know who I'm talking. Mel Brooks.
Yeah,
Mel
Mel. Okay,
Brooks.
yeah, Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks turned down the award. He was offered it. Robin Williams turned down the award, didn't want it, right? So this award is very interesting. It's malleable. Uh, do we need a Mark Twain? Not do we need. Are we going to be able to mold successfully a Mark Twain for the time on the other side of well, in the spring high that we're coming into as a society? Or will Mark Twain be one of those folks that will just sort of fade to the background until the next unraveling shows up like 60 years from now?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think it would be helpful to have someone like that. I do think that person is going to have to come from the right. I mean, I could be wrong about that. Maybe
Sure.
it's left, but I do think based on because I do agree with you. I think about like you were talking about just having the right perspective on
Yeah.
human history and being more comfortable with things. I got to thinking about the obsession in our culture over the last few years over justice.
Hmm.
Justice, justice, justice. Black Lives Matter, all this other. And I was thinking about, as a person on the right, it's not that, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think I can speak in general terms, and certainly for myself. It's not that I think conservatives are against justice at all. It's an understanding, though, that ultimate justice cannot be achieved in a fallen world. In other words, it doesn't matter if someone, the whole point of forgiveness, of the concept of forgiveness, okay? As a pastor, I preached extensively on forgiveness for a long time, in a lot of different contexts, whether it's counseling or marriage ministry or recovery ministry. The purpose of forgiveness is the person you're forgiving is not competent to pay back what they took from you. Completely incompetent. They can't do it. They cannot rewind the clock. They can't take back the words. Even if they say, I'm sorry, the words were still said. The action was still taken. And they can't rewind history and take all that back. So there is no undoing. It's not going to be undone. And so even if they paid a price, like what? Like, go to jail or something else, whatever that is, it's still not going to make up for what happened, because that can't be undone. And so we believe, as a Christian, I believe that there will be a day when all wrongs are made right. There will be a day of ultimate justice. It just won't be in this life. And so with that as a context, right, and as I live out my Christian faith, as I impart forgiveness to someone, I do it in the context of how would I want to receive forgiveness. So Jesus says, or in the model prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive others, right? So just the way I forgive other people, God, that's how I want you to treat me. And with my own sinfulness, with my own brokenness, my own patterns of unhealth and sin in my life, just as the level of forgiveness that I want for that, that's the level that I want to try to present to other people. So again, that's not to say we don't want justice. We don't, criminals don't go to jail. People aren't tried for crimes. None of that. But just knowing that a society that says ultimate justice must be achieved is a society that can't function. Because there is no way to achieve ultimate justice without someone paying the ultimate price by dying, really, at the end of the day. So that's why you see a lot of violence in a lot of these social justice causes, because in order to achieve ultimate justice, somebody does have to die. They really do.
With that, we're going to go back to the book, back to Huckleberry Finn. We're going to pick up in chapter 16, following up with the rattlesnake skin. The rattlesnake skin does its work. We slept most all day and started out at night, a little ways behind a monstrous long raft that was as long going by as a procession. She had 4 long sweeps at each end, so each she carried as many as 30 men likely. She had 5 big wigwams aboard, wide apart, and an open campfire in the middle, and a tall flagpole at each end. There was a power of style about her. It amounted to something, being a raftsman on such a craft as that. We went drifting down into a big bend, and the night clouded up and got hot. The river was very wide, and it was walled with solid timber on both sides, so you couldn't see a break in it hardly ever or light. We talked about Cairo and wondered whether we would know it when we got to it. I said likely we wouldn't, because I had heard say there weren't but about a dozen houses there, and even if they did happen to have them lit up, how was he going to know we was passing a town? Jim said if the 2 big rivers joined together there, that would show. I said maybe we might think we was passing the foot of an island and coming into the same old river again. That disturbed Jim and me too. So the question was what to do. I said paddle ashore the first time a light showed and tell them Pat was behind. Come along with the trading scow and was a green hand at the business and wanted to know how far it was to Cairo. Jim thought it was a good idea, so we took a smoke on it and waited. There's nothing to do now but to look out sharp for the town, not pass by without seeing it. He said he'd be mighty sure to see it because he'd be a free man the minute he seen it. But if he missed it, he'd be in a slave country again and no more show for freedom. Every little while, he jumps up and says, there she is. But it weren't. It was jack-o'-lanterns or lightning bugs, so he sit down again and went to watching same as before. Jim said it made him all over trembly and feverish to be so close to freedom. Well, I could tell you it made me all over trembly and feverish too to hear him because I began to get it through my head that he was most free. And who to blame for it? Why me? I couldn't get that out of my conscience, no how nor way. It got to troubling me so I couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still in one place. I had never come home to me before what this thing was that I was doing. But now it did, and it stayed with me. It scorched me more and more. I tried to make out to myself I weren't to blame because I didn't run Jim off from his rightful owner. Or no use. Conscience up and says every time. But you knowed he was running away for his freedom, and you could have paddled ashore and told somebody. That was so. I couldn't get around that no way. That was where it pinched. Conscience says to me, what had poor Miss Watson done to you that you could ever see her nigger go off right underneath your eyes and never say one single word? What did that poor old woman do to you that you could treat her so mean? Why, she tried to learn your book, and she tried to learn your manners, and she tried good to you every way she knowed how. That's what she's done. I got to feeling so mean and so miserable. I almost wish I was dead. I fidgeted up and down the raft, amusing myself to myself, and Jim was fidgeting up and down past me. We neither of us could keep still. Every time he danced around and says, "Days Cairo," it went through me like a shot, and I thought if it was Cairo, I reckoned I would die of miserableness. Jim talked out loud the whole time I was talking to myself. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got up to a free state, he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent. And when he got enough, he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived. And then they would both work to buy 2 children. And if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. Most froze me to hear such talk. He would never dare to talk like such talk in his life before. Just see what a difference it made in him the minute he judged he was about to be free. It was according to the old saying, give a nigger an inch and he'll take an L. Thinks I, this is what comes of my not thinking. Here was this nigger, which I had just as good as helped to run away, come right out flat-footed, saying he would steal his children. Children that belonged to a man I didn't even know, a man that had never done me no harm. I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring at me hotter than ever then, until at last I says to it, let me up on it. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went out to look for a light, sort of singing to myself. By and by, one showed. Jim sings out, we safe, Huck, we safe. Jump up and crack your heels. That's good old Cairo at last. I just knows it. I says, I'll take a canoe and go see Jim. It mightn't be, you know. He jumped up and got the canoe ready and put his old coat in the bottom for me to sit on and give me the paddle. And I shoved off and he says, pretty soon I'll be shouting for joy. And I'll say, it's all accounts of old Huck. I was a free man and I could never have been freer if it hadn't been for Huck. Huck done it. Jim won't ever forget you, Huck. You've been the best friend Jim's ever had, and you're the only friend Jim's got now. I was paddling off, all in a sweat to tell on him. But when he says this, it seemed to kind of take the tuck all out of me. That's what you teach to kids in school. That right there. That's what you teach to your kid in your house. That right there. Yeah. That's the conversation you have with your child, white or Hispanic or black or Asian, or I don't care. That's Native American. One of our co-hosts on the show, Tom Libby, he's a Native American. Very proud of his Native American heritage. And we've read hard books on this podcast, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and the story of the Native American tribes and the things that happened to them in the course of westward expansion. And you know what? Tom talks openly about all of that stuff. And do you know where he first started talking about all of that history with when he found out about it when he was a kid? He started with his children to rebuild his culture.
Yeah.
Tom doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving. Why would he? It doesn't have any meaning for him. But he's not going out advocating that other people don't celebrate Thanksgiving. He's just saying, don't do it for me. I'm not doing it in my house. And my kids will go do something else because I read the book and I taught it to my kids. This is what I am stunned by people's failure and inability to think that critically about a book that, quite frankly, forces you to engage with the dichotomies of living in a fallen world.
Yeah.
It also engages with you at a level of authenticity that I think puts us in our time close to the bone. The challenge of our time is that courage, which has always been in short supply, is now no longer connected to critical thinking and analysis of best practices, which I think we've already mentioned that. When original thinking is on life support, leaders should encourage courage. Making other people uncomfortable in the pursuit of being authentic used to be looked at as an iconoclastic act because so many people seem to be just going along with the flow. What our time has shown is that people still follow the crowd. It's just that the size of the crowds has gotten smaller and narrower in the social media driven ghettos full of all these right thinking people. By the way, I'm looking at all of you who are running to Blue Sky from Twitter right about now. Leaders pursue authenticity above all else while also being aware of what social mores they need to preserve. Like in that piece that I read there, they need to ignore, like in that piece I just read there, and they need to break, like in that piece I just read there. And they have clear, intentional, and well rationalized reasons for their authentic responses. So this is going to be something that we are going to wrap up with as we close today. Brian, the writer Ted Goya, I put a link in the script that I sent you to the article. He wrote an article that I found to be very interesting about a crisis of authenticity in our era. And Ted makes the point, and he writes a Substack called The Honest Broker. He's a tech guy from way back in the day, and he makes a point in this article that Susan Sontag, back in the 1990s, the feminist and cultural critic, she believed that seriousness as a function of art and entertainment and culture had collapsed in the West in the mid 1990s. And Ted asserts that after 30 years after this collapse, we're no closer to authenticity now than we were in the mid 1990s. And he asserts also that these platforms that we exist on allow us to be fake entertainers, putting out avatars of ourselves that protect us from having to really deal with real things in a real way. And we are rewarded for behaving and thinking correctly, but not critically. He says, and I quote, I love this quote, lifestyles are increasingly about pretending. Your real self stays in hiding while your fake self gets presented in the most spectacular way on social media and other digital platforms. Now, this ties into something that we've talked about on the podcast too, which is the crisis of competence, which is where I think we're at, where the small things are done poorly, the middle things are done on average or done in an average manner, and the large responsibilities are bungled entirely. And Ted, another quote from his article here from The Honest Broker, is there a crisis of seriousness? Never before in history has authenticity been in such short supply. That's so much the case that the very word authenticity is mocked. I know people who get angry just from hearing the word authenticity. They insist it doesn't exist, it never existed, and it can't possibly exist. Here at the end of the fourth turning, how do we ensure authenticity? Oh, hold on one second. I'm going to kill a wasp. Hold on one second.
All right. Was there a murder? Was a murder off screen just now?
There was a murder off screen. I slayed that sucker. And now back to our show. I really do. I do not like wasps. Oh my gosh. I do not know how it got in. That's kind of weird because this is an interior room. I don't know where it came from. Uh, all right. Well, that's going to bother me for the next week. All right. All right. So the crisis of authenticity. How do we deal with this?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of, I mean, I think I agree largely with what he says. I do think, though, there are some pockets of authenticity that are starting to emerge in certain places. I mean, and again, probably are they genuine, like 100% authentic? I mean, how authentic are they? I don't really know, but I do think that like long form podcasts, I think are a start. They're a place for that. I mean, when you look at kind of what Joe Rogan did. I mean, just think about the last election. What Joe Rogan did in 3 hours or 2.5 hours or whatever with Trump and then JD Vance. I mean, you can't fake. I mean, you can only say so many platitudes. Over the course of 3 hours, you're going to cover a lot of ground. There's going to be a lot that comes out. You're going to say things in a certain way. If you're faking it, it is really hard to fake it for a really long time. And so I do think that those, I mean, I think that's why Kamala never went on one of those, long form podcasts. I think she was trying to have a curated image. So I think there are pockets. I think there's that. I think there are I've been a part of some churches that have made a really big effort to try to live an authentic Christian life, not one that's carefully curated. And so I do think there are pockets emerging. How will it end up? I don't know. But I think, how your question was, how do we deal with, inauthenticities? I think
Yeah.
we approach life honestly. We speak candidly about challenges that we're facing. And I think if we're able to, it's fine to have a conviction, but sometimes, we talked earlier about beliefs and convictions. Sometimes those things, you think you have a belief, and it winds up it's a conviction. And then you have a conviction, and after some thought and debate, and you come to the conclusion, maybe that's just a belief, And so I think there has to be, and in the course of this fourth turning, I think there's a lot of changing of that. Some things that you held as a belief now have become a conviction, and vice versa. And so I think giving people room to work that out and maybe say something, and then in 6 months realize, oh, I didn't mean that actually. Now that I understand a little bit more about it, I think being the hard part about cancel culture is it doesn't give anybody room to make a mistake and then admit they made a mistake. Like, you're done.
Right.
So,
right.
So I think cancel culture exacerbates this authenticity crisis that we have. But I think just at the end of the day, just being honest when you have a mistake, when you make a mistake, owning that mistake and being willing to acknowledge that and talk about it openly, I think goes a really long way with people. At least that's been my experience.
Well, what do you say? I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on the idea that Ted puts forth. And I do think it is an idea that is unique to our time only because we have the technology to make it unique to our time. So we have people who have grown up. We now have 2 generations of people getting ready to be 3 who have grown up inside of, for lack of a better term, the Matrix. They're in there. And you and I are part of the tail end of the last generation to not fully be engaged in the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
I think that gives us as leaders a certain amount of power. It also gives us a certain amount of responsibility to preserve authenticity, to preserve competency. And I think, by the way, those of us who are in the like 46 to like 52-year-old age range, I think the light went on earlier this year with a lot of us, and we finally realized that the sort of Gen X slacker pose we've all been taking since 1992 is probably done. Finally probably done. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because typically the nomad generation, if you're looking at turnings, the nomad generation always shows up late, has to make up for the problems and the mistakes of the older generation who was thought to be so wise. And then, much like Harry Truman, gets back in their car after they're no longer president, no Secret Service or no nothing. I love this, and just drives back to Missouri and dies in obscurity. Like that's the clearing at the end of the path for Gen X. I'm sorry, like I keep saying this on this podcast. Like that's right. And for many of us, that'll be like that tracks. That's
I'm actually okay with that. That's fine.
That's fine. That tracks. We're not a generation that gets a thank you, right? But we're the generation that preserves the authenticity, because if we don't do it, then the generations that are coming behind us, to Ted Goya's point, will insist that authenticity does not exist. They will insist that it never, that's a huge word, existed. And they will insist that it can't possibly exist. Mm-hmm. How do you lead people who believe that? Because they're so deep in the matrix, they wouldn't recognize, authenticity. That's even that. They look at authenticity as being inauthentic. Like there's nothing, I hate to pick on her, but I'm going to anyway. There's nothing authentic about Taylor Swift. Literally nothing. She is not real. She is a creation of herself and her agents and her managers and her albums and all of that. She's a creation who has come into the media, but there's no knowledge about who the real Taylor Swift is. Now, people would say, particularly 18, 19-year-old people would say, oh yeah, of course. Like, of course she's inauthentic. They just sort of take it as de rigueur. It's just part of the fabric of their lives. And as I said there in my piece a little bit before, we used to call people who stepped out of that inauthenticity and showed us something authentic iconoclasts, right? But we've lost the use of that term. We don't even recognize those people if they showed up. So how can leaders show authenticity to people who don't even believe it can exist? Because there's a level of lack of trust there, I think, fundamentally, that we're also chasing.
Yeah. I think when it comes to leaders, one of the most authentic things you can do as a leader is to take responsibility. Take responsibility for, first off, for yourself, but also for others. So you talk about the managerial class and they are professionals at avoiding responsibility, right? So there's always some study, there's always some form to fill out, there's always some committee, there's always some peer review article, there's something that you can hide behind and avoid responsibility for whatever the challenge is that's being faced. I think leaders who want to demonstrate authenticity are going to be leaders that are willing to take responsibility for things, whether or not they're guilty of it or not, is beside the point. That somebody who's guilty and someone who's responsible are not necessarily the same things. I mean, when I was in the military, okay, and so as a commander, as a battery commander, I was responsible for what happened or didn't happen in my unit. Now, I may have had a soldier who was guilty of negligence and got himself or somebody else killed. I'm not guilty of that negligence, but I'm responsible for it. Right. And so I would be held responsible for something that happened, right? And as I should be. And so I think as leaders, if you want to be an authentic leader, if you want to be someone who is listened to with gravitas, a person. There used to be an old commercial when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen.
Yep.
If you want to be that guy, take responsibility. Take responsibility, even if it wasn't your fault. You say, hey, I don't know how I don't know what my part was in the guilt hierarchy of things, but I want to be responsible to fix it. I want to take that on. And if you can be that guy, regardless of whether or not you were guilty, but if you can be that guy or that girl, and say, hey, I'll be responsible for fixing this. Regardless of who caused it, I'm responsible here. I'll take the blame. I'll take the fault. People are drawn to that person. They're just drawn to them. It's almost like that's a safe person for me to live out my calling underneath, right?
Right.
And that's I think where things start to heal and kind of come together is when we have leaders who can take responsibility regardless of whether or not they're guilty of the current situation.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a great line in the movie directed by Snatch. Yes. It's Irish boxing. Brad Pitt plays a bumbling Irish boxer in it. And there's a character in there named Bricktop. And basically, there was a fight that was supposed to happen in a particular way. It doesn't happen in that way. Guy Ritchie directed this. It's a British film. The fight doesn't happen in that particular way. Bricktop is then confronted by the people because he runs an underground boxing and illegal betting. And the people who bet on, the fight come to him, and they're people with more money and more power than him. And they're like, why didn't the fight go the way that you wanted it to go, or that we wanted it to go, right? Because we paid for this person, the Brad Pitt character, to take a dive, basically, and Brad Pitt doesn't do that. And Bricktop gives a great line, which backs up what Brian is saying here. He says, stand on me. I will make it right. And then he just walks away. Well, there's some other things that happen after that. There's an entire sequence because it's all supposed to be a comedy. So there's an entire sequence of things that happen after that. But that's the line. Stand on me. Stand on my shoulders. I will take you to the promised land. Doesn't matter if you can't see it. Doesn't matter if you are ambivalent about my ability to do that. Stand on me. I will take responsibility.
You're gonna fire somebody?
Yeah. Yeah. If you're gonna fire somebody, fire me. It's fine. There's another idea I want to run past you, and it does jump out to me from the Ted Goya piece, and we'll close with this idea I want to run past you. I think people who want to be authentic have to decline to participate in unseriousness. Doesn't mean they can't laugh at themselves. Doesn't mean they can't be humorous like we started off. I mean, this book is a comedy. I mean, come on. It's a comedy. It's a parody. It's absurdity. Rush Limbaugh back in the day used to say, illustrating absurdity by being absurd, It's all of those things, right? But at the same time, it doesn't descend into being unserious. And that's a heck of a tightrope to walk. But I think leaders, I want to know what your thoughts are on that. Do leaders have to, I'll frame it as a question, do leaders have to walk that tightrope between, or how do they walk that tightrope between being authentic but not participating in unseriousness? Like, how do you do that? Because these days, participating in unseriousness is thought of as being funny. It's thought of as being self-deprecating. And yet, I don't know where the line is, right? But I do think that that's part of the equation, but I don't know how you click those things together.
Yeah. I think some of the most effective leaders that I saw, that I've seen, were able to just laugh at themselves. They didn't participate in unseriousness, but they were able to laugh at unserious. They were able to laugh at it, And I'm thinking of you know, whether I've been in military ministry, I've been in uh, I've worked in oil and gas, and those leaders who, because inevitably, if you are in charge,
Mm-hmm.
okay, people who are under you are going to make fun of
Oh,
you. Okay.
invariably. Yeah.
I mean, and so you just know that's part of it. That's just
Right.
part of being a leader, is that people are going to make fun of you. And so I think being able to laugh at that, and to laugh with those people that you are leading, um, when it makes them, it's safe for them to criticize you. Okay, now it's criticism in a way that is, it's a fine line in and of itself, right?
Right.
And but if you can laugh at that, if you can laugh at their caricatures, their criticisms of you, that, right, they're trying to be funny, make fun of you, poke fun at you. If you can laugh at that, to me, that makes you more serious. To me, that as a leader, that means you acknowledge your shortcomings. You know that they're there. You're not unaware of them. And you can appreciate the fact that someone else can find humor in
Yeah.
that. And so I think, but I've also known leaders, that were that but that's not to say that you would be the one writing the script for those things, right? And participate. To me, that would be unserious. I think if
Right.
you're
Yeah.
if you're the one that's like, somehow trying to curate the comedy show that's making fun of you, I think that's totally serious. And so, to me, I think that, I don't know if that answers your question. I think being able to laugh at yourself, to know that you have shortcomings, to laugh with the people that are making fun of you. Um, I just, that's the best I come up with at the moment.
In popular culture, I think of the show, and you may have seen it or you may not have, Brian. But Brooklyn Nine-Nine, comedy show from years ago. It's on Netflix now. It's streaming now. That's how I found it. But it's got Andre Braugher in it, who was a very serious Shakespearean actor. Was on that show Homicide: Life on the Streets. Very serious, Emmy-winning, very serious actor. And he's on this comedy show with Andy Samberg from Saturday Night Live. And there's a bunch of other characters on there. The guy from the Old Spice commercials, Terry Crews, and Idiocracy is also on the show. And he plays a police captain, obviously, in New York City for the 99th precinct. And so he's surrounded by all these goofballs. It's a serious, very serious guy, serious about his role, serious about who he is as a captain, serious about what he does. And he's literally surrounded by, and this is the only way I can think to describe it, he's surrounded by morons, people who are just stumbling all over themselves and, solving cases by accident, and total complete goofballs. And you could watch over the course of 3 or 4 seasons how they loosen his character up very gradually, very gradually. Matter of fact, the last episode that I watched, there was some reference to the old Tone Loc song from the 1990s, Funky Cold Medina. And Andre Braugher like deadpans this, and he does throughout he deadpans all of his lines. He's taking it absolutely deadly seriously as a leader, but you can tell he cares about his people, right? And they all make fun of him. And the Andy Samberg character, who's like his protege, or he adopts as his protege, really looks up to him and really admires him, but he's constantly trying to get him to crack his serious demeanor. And then he'll say something totally literally out of left field, and you'll be like, oh wait, he's just as much of a goofball as the rest of these people are. He's just serious. And so I've got that thing rattling around in my head right now, as you're talking. And that's a good at a comedic level, which kind of goes along with the book that we're reading today. He declines that is the Andre Braugher character in there, Captain Holt. He declines to participate in unserious nonsense. Like, he doesn't do pranks or anything like that. but he will do the, like, once a year we're going to steal the Halloween something or other from somebody or other. Like, he just outrageous, outlandish stuff that you wouldn't, and he deadpans the whole thing. And like, this guy's dead serious. He's an Emmy-winning actor surrounded by these morons with Saturday Night Live. And that's how that show works. That's how it works. And I think it's an example of what you're talking about there, where the leader doesn't participate in the clowning of himself or herself, but they understand, to your point, that the clowning is going to happen at some point. And the only job for you as a leader is to tell everybody when it crosses the line.
Yeah.
And to be sure to hold that line fairly consistently. And then let the chips fall where they may at that point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Wow. Look at that. I think we've covered a lot from the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I think you ought to go out and you ought to get this book if you have not read it, or if the last time you read it was maybe in high school and you've forgotten things about it. You should probably go back and read it again as a leader. There's a lot of areas in this book that we did not cover. We just barely scraped the surface of the challenges between abolition and slavery, that Mark Twain looks at quite baldly, but also the challenges between being on the river and being in civilization and being in culture. And of course, the challenges of being a rebellious young man in a world where rebellion is being tampered down, where the West is being wrestled to the ground and tamed. All of these themes resonate and are resonant inside of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, written by Mark Twain. And I would encourage you to read it yourself. And don't you dare let a legislator or somebody else determine who the Twain for your time and for your understanding can be. I'd like to thank Brian Bagley for coming on the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And with that, well, as usual, we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.